I spent 10 years saving for my dream apartment. Then my parents demanded I give it to my unemployed sister. I'm a 32-year-old man who spent 10 years meticulously saving for my dream apartment. What should have been a personal triumph turned into a family nightmare when my parents made an unthinkable demand: give my apartment to my unemployed sister as a birthday gift. This is my story of standing firm against family pressure, protecting what I worked for, and finding the strength to choose my own path despite the emotional cost. The demand. When I finally closed on my apartment last month, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just any property, it was the result of a decade of sacrifice. I'd worked overtime, skipped vacations, and lived far below my means to save the down payment. Located in a historic neighborhood with exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and a view of the city park, it represented everything I'd been working toward. My excitement was short-lived. 3 days after moving in, my parents invited me to dinner. I assumed it was to celebrate my achievement, but I couldn't have been more wrong. "James, your sister Emily is turning 30 next month," my mother began after dessert was served. "Your father and I have been thinking about what she needs." Emily had been unemployed for nearly 2 years after quitting her third job in as many years. She'd been living with our parents rent-free, spending most of her days watching TV and complaining about how unfair life was. "She needs a fresh start," my father continued, leaning forward. "A place of her own where she can finally get her life together." I nodded absently, wondering where this was going. Then my mother dropped the bombshell. "We think you should give her your new apartment as a birthday gift." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me. You heard your mother," my father said firmly. "Emily needs this more than you do. You're established, you have a good job. She's struggling." For a moment, I thought they were joking. "You can't be serious. I just spent 10 years saving for this place." "That's exactly why it's perfect," my mother insisted. "It's already paid for. Emily couldn't afford something like this on her own." "Because she doesn't work," I pointed out. My father's face darkened. "Don't be selfish, James. Family supports family. Your sister deserves a chance at a fresh start, and you're in a position to help her." The conversation devolved from there. I explained that the apartment wasn't paid for, I had a mortgage. I reminded them that I'd sacrificed for years to afford it. I suggested that if Emily wanted a fresh start, she could get a job and an apartment she could actually afford. None of it mattered. They were adamant that I should simply hand over the keys and find somewhere else to live. When I flatly refused, my mother's eyes welled with tears. "I never thought you'd be so selfish," she whispered. "After everything we've done for you." I left their house that night in a daze, wondering if I was missing something. Had I somehow been raised to believe that my achievements belonged to my family to redistribute? Was I being selfish for wanting to keep the property I'd worked so hard to obtain? That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation, searching for some logic I'd missed. By morning, I was certain I wasn't going to give up my apartment. But I also knew my parents wouldn't drop this easily. They'd always favored Emily, excusing her lack of motivation as finding herself, while holding me to much higher standards. I decided to limit contact with them for a few weeks, hoping they'd come to their senses once they realized how unreasonable their demand was. I ignored their calls and texts, focusing instead on settling into my new home and enjoying the fruits of my decade-long labor. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle I never asked for, one that would test my boundaries, challenge my relationships, and ultimately force me to choose between my own hard-earned success and my family's twisted expectations. Update 1. The Unwelcome Visitor. I thought ignoring my parents' calls would give them time to realize how unreasonable their demand was. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the dinner, I came home early from work to find my sister Emily in my apartment, measuring the living room walls with a tape measure. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway, keys still in hand, trying to process what I was seeing. "What are you doing here?" I finally managed to ask. Emily turned, looking annoyed rather than embarrassed at being caught. "Oh, you're home early. Mom and Dad gave me the spare key. I'm just seeing what furniture will fit." The spare key. The one I'd given my parents for emergencies only, with clear instructions that it wasn't to be shared. "How did you even—" I stopped, realizing the obvious. "They gave you my key?" "Yeah," she replied casually, continuing to measure. "I'm thinking of painting this wall blue. The current color is so boring." It took everything in me not to shout. "Emily, you need to leave. Now." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. This is going to be my place soon anyway. Mom and Dad said you agreed to give it to me for my birthday." "What? I absolutely did not agree to that." Emily finally stopped measuring and looked at me with irritation. That's not what they told me. They said you were being difficult at first, but came around. They said you understood that I need this more than you do. The audacity was stunning. Not only had my parents completely disregarded my refusal, but they'd also lied to Emily, setting up a situation where I'd be the bad guy when the truth came out. I never agreed to give you my apartment, I said firmly. I worked for 10 years to afford this place. It's mine, and I'm not giving it away. Emily's face contorted with anger. You're so selfish. You know I've been struggling. You have a good job. You can just buy another place. Why do you have to be so difficult? Emily, this isn't about being difficult. This is about respecting boundaries and the fact that this is my property, purchased with my money, after years of saving. God, you sound like such a capitalist, she sneered. It's always about money with you. It's not about money. It's about respect and the fact that no one in this family seems to have any for me or my belongings. The argument escalated from there. Emily accused me of always thinking I was better than her because I had a stable job. I pointed out that she could have a stable job too if she stopped quitting every time work became challenging. She called me heartless. I called her entitled. Finally, I'd had enough. I want my key back, and I want you to leave. Now. Fine, she spat, throwing the key at me. I'm calling Mom and Dad. They'll talk some sense into you. After she stormed out, I immediately called a locksmith. Within 2 hours, I had new locks installed on all doors. I also contacted the building management to ensure no one could gain access to my apartment without my explicit permission. That evening, my phone exploded with texts and calls from my parents, demanding to know why I'd kicked Emily out and changed the locks. I sent one message in response. My apartment is not up for discussion or negotiation. Please respect my property and my decision. They didn't. For the next several days, the bombardment continued. My mother left tearful voicemails about family loyalty. My father sent increasingly angry texts about my selfishness. Emily posted vague social media updates about toxic family members who only care about themselves. I realized this wasn't going to blow over. My family had somehow convinced themselves that my property was theirs to allocate, and they weren't backing down. I needed to take more definitive action to protect myself and what I'd worked so hard to achieve. After consulting with a lawyer friend, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter, making it clear that any further attempts to access my apartment without permission would be considered trespassing. I also informed my building security about the situation, providing them with photos of my family members and instructions not to allow them entry under any circumstances. These measures felt extreme, but the boundary violations had already gone too far. Finding Emily in my apartment, planning renovations as if it was already hers, made me realize how little respect my family had for me and my achievements. As I write this update, I'm still processing the shock and disappointment. The family I thought would celebrate my success is instead trying to appropriate it for someone else. But one thing has become crystal clear: I won't give up what I've worked so hard for, not even to keep the peace with my family. Update 2. 3 months later, legal protections. It's been 3 months since I found Emily measuring my living room walls, and I've learned more about standing my ground than I ever wanted to. After changing my locks and sending the cease and desist letter, I naively hoped my family would back down. They didn't. Instead, they escalated in ways I never anticipated. First came the family ambush. 2 weeks after the Emily incident, I arrived home to find my parents, Emily, and 2 aunts waiting outside my building. They'd planned a family intervention to convince me to do the right thing. I refused to engage and walked straight past them into the building, thankful for the security measures I'd put in place. Then came the financial threats. My father called to remind me that I was a beneficiary in their will and that family loyalty goes both ways. The implication was clear: give Emily the apartment or be disinherited. I simply told him I'd rather make my own way than be controlled by inheritance promises. When intimidation didn't work, they switched to emotional manipulation. My mother started sending daily texts about how my cruelty was affecting her health. Extended family members I barely spoke to began reaching out, urging me to make peace by giving in. One cousin even suggested I could just buy another apartment, since I was so good with money. The situation became so stressful that my work performance began to suffer. After a particularly rough week of sleepless nights, I finally decided to take comprehensive legal action. I consulted with a proper attorney who specialized in family law and property disputes. She was appalled by my family's behavior and helped me implement a multi-layered protection plan. A formal legal notice was sent to my parents and Emily, explicitly stating that any further attempts to pressure me about the apartment would be considered harassment. I filed a restraining order specifically preventing them from coming to my workplace or apartment building. I documented all instances of harassment and manipulation, creating a paper trail in case the situation escalated further. I added specific language to my will and other legal documents ensuring that under no circumstances would my apartment ever transfer to Emily. I installed security cameras at my apartment entrance. Taking these steps wasn't easy. Each action felt like another brick in a wall between me and my family. But they were necessary for my peace of mind and to protect what I'd worked so hard to achieve. The legal measures had an immediate effect. The daily calls and texts slowed to a trickle, then stopped almost entirely. My parents and Emily retreated, apparently realizing I was serious about defending my boundaries. During this period of relative calm, I've had time to reflect on the situation and my family dynamics more broadly. I've come to recognize patterns I'd previously overlooked. How my parents always expected more from me while demanding less of Emily, how my achievements were treated as family resources while Emily's failures were always someone else's fault. I've also connected with a therapist who specializes in family dynamics. Our sessions have been eye-opening, helping me understand that my resistance isn't selfishness, it's healthy boundary setting. Your family is operating under the assumption that your success belongs to them, my therapist explained. By refusing to give in, you're not just protecting your property, you're establishing that your life is your own. Meanwhile, through a mutual friend, I learned that Emily finally found a job, her first in over 2 years. It's entry-level retail work, nothing glamorous, but it's a start. Part of me wonders if my refusal to bail her out actually forced her to take responsibility for once. As things stand now, I've reached an uneasy truce with my family. We're not speaking much, but the active attempts to take my apartment have ceased. The restraining order feels extreme, but it's provided the space I needed to strengthen my resolve and clarify my thinking. I know this isn't over. Family patterns don't change overnight, and I suspect they're just regrouping, planning a new approach. But I'm prepared now, legally and emotionally. My apartment, the culmination of a decade of hard work and sacrifice, remains mine, its walls now standing as a physical representation of the boundaries I've finally learned to set. Update 3. 6 months later, the ultimatum. 6 months have passed since finding Emily in my apartment, and just when I thought the situation couldn't become more challenging, my family delivered their final play, an ultimatum. It came during a carefully orchestrated family gathering at my aunt's house. I had cautiously agreed to attend after weeks of my aunt insisting it was just a normal family dinner with no agenda. I should have known better. Halfway through the meal, my father clinked his glass for attention. "We need to address the elephant in the room," he announced, looking directly at me. "James's continued selfishness has torn this family apart." Before I could respond, he continued, "We've tried to be patient. We've tried to understand. But this has gone on long enough. It's time for you to make a choice, son. Either you do right by your sister and transfer the apartment to her, or you're no longer part of this family." The table fell silent. Even relatives who had been messaging me privately, expressing sympathy for my position, sat quietly, unwilling to challenge my father's declaration. "I've already made my choice," I said calmly, standing up. "And I see you've made yours. I wish you all the best." I walked out, ignoring my mother's tearful pleas to stay and my sister's smug expression. As I drove home, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The ultimatum, meant to force my compliance, had instead clarified everything. The next day, I received separate calls from 3 family members who had been at the dinner. My cousin Ryan admitted that my parents had planned the ambush, hoping public pressure would force me to give in. My Aunt Margaret apologized for her role, confessing she'd only hosted the dinner because my parents insisted. And surprisingly, my Uncle Thomas, who had always been close to my father, told me he thought my parents' behavior was absolutely insane, and that I was right to stand my ground. These conversations confirmed what I had begun to suspect. This wasn't a universally supported family position. Many relatives were uncomfortable with my parents' demands, but had stayed silent to avoid conflict. With this knowledge, I made a decision. Instead of cutting off my entire extended family, I would maintain relationships with those who respected my boundaries while creating distance from those who didn't, specifically, my parents and Emily. I wrote a detailed email to my extended family explaining my position one last time. I outlined the decade of saving, the strategic financial planning, and the personal sacrifices I had made to afford my apartment. I clarified that I had never once promised or suggested giving it to Emily. I explained that while I wished her well, my property was not a family resource to be redistributed. I ended by stating that I would no longer discuss the matter and that anyone who continued to pressure me would be removed from my life, at least temporarily. The responses were illuminating. Several relatives expressed support and apologized for not speaking up sooner. Others maintained an awkward neutrality. A few, primarily those closest to my parents, doubled down on their criticism. My parents' response was both predictable and disappointing. My mother sent a long, emotionally charged email about how I had chosen an apartment over family, and how she had failed as a mother to instill proper values in me. My father was more direct. "You've made your choice. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." Emily's reaction was unexpected. She sent a text that simply read, "I never actually wanted your stupid apartment. This was all Mom and Dad's idea." Whether that was true or a face-saving lie, I'll never know, but it was the first communication from her that wasn't filled with entitlement or accusations. In the weeks that followed, I took concrete steps to formalize this family reorganization. I drafted a clear no-contact email to my parents and Emily, stating that I needed indefinite space from them and would reach out if and when I was ready. I updated my emergency contacts at work and with my doctor, removing my parents and adding trusted friends. I wrote a new will with explicit instructions that none of my assets, particularly my apartment, should ever transfer to my parents or Emily under any circumstances. I began building stronger connections with the family members who had shown respect for my boundaries. I continued therapy, focusing on processing the grief of essentially losing my immediate family while strengthening my resilience. Today marks exactly 6 months since I found Emily measuring my living room. My apartment has become more than just a home. It's a symbol of my independence and self-respect. I've redecorated, making the space truly mine. Each item I carefully select and place feels like another affirmation that my life is my own. The estrangement from my parents and sister is painful, but it's also clarifying. For the first time in my life, I'm not carrying the weight of their expectations and demands. I'm making decisions based solely on what's right for me. Do I miss them? Yes, but I miss the family I thought I had, not the one that tried to bully me out of my home. Do I sometimes wonder if giving up the apartment would have been easier than losing my immediate family? Occasionally, in moments of weakness. But then I remember that giving in wouldn't have solved the underlying problem, it would have reinforced it. My therapist put it best, this was never really about the apartment. It was about whether you have the right to set boundaries and live your own life. Your family's reaction shows that they don't believe you have that right. So here I stand, 6 months later, in the apartment I worked 10 years to afford. I am estranged from my parents and sister, but closer to myself than I've ever been. I've learned that sometimes the price of self-respect is high, but it's always worth paying. Final update. 1 year later, finding peace. Today marks exactly 1 year since I found my sister in my apartment with a measuring tape, planning to claim my home as her own. What a difference a year makes. The apartment that caused so much family strife has truly become my sanctuary. I've finished decorating each room, creating a space that reflects who I am. The exposed brick walls now display artwork I've carefully selected. The living room, the same one Emily was measuring, has become my favorite place to relax after work, a physical reminder of why standing my ground was worth it. As for my family situation, things have evolved in ways I never anticipated. My parents maintained their position for about 9 months, refusing to acknowledge my right to my own property. Then, unexpectedly, my father suffered a minor heart attack. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough to prompt reflection. During his recovery, he reached out with a brief message, "I'd like to talk when you're ready." When we eventually met at a neutral coffee shop, he didn't apologize exactly, but he did acknowledge that perhaps they had overstepped. It wasn't the full recognition of their inappropriate behavior that I hoped for, but it was something. We've established a cautious, distant relationship, occasional texts, rare phone calls, carefully avoiding any mention of the apartment or Emily. My mother has been less willing to move forward. She still makes passive-aggressive comments about my priorities whenever we interact, which is why I keep our communication minimal. I've accepted that she may never understand my perspective, and that's okay. I no longer need her approval to feel confident in my decisions. The most surprising development has been with Emily. After months of silence, she contacted me through a mutual friend, asking to meet. Curious and cautious, I agreed to see her at the same coffee shop where I'd met my father. She looked different, more put together, less entitled somehow. "I got an apartment," she announced without preamble. "A small studio. Nothing fancy, but I'm paying for it myself." It turned out that after failing to get my place, Emily had finally maintained a job for more than a few months. She'd saved enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a modest apartment across town. For the first time in her adult life, she was fully supporting herself. "I was angry at you for so long," she admitted. "But then I realized something. You never had anything handed to you. You worked for everything. And there was, I don't know, a dignity in that, I guess. We're not close, and perhaps we never will be. But there's a newfound respect between us, a recognition that we're both adults responsible for creating our own paths. The extended family has largely moved on from the drama. Those who supported my parents' demands have maintained their distance, which is fine by me. Those who recognized the situation for what it was, an unreasonable attempt to appropriate my property, have become closer allies than before. Throughout this year, my therapist has helped me understand that my family's behavior wasn't just about an apartment, it was about control. For years, they'd operated under the assumption that my achievements belonged to the family collective, while Emily's struggles were everyone's responsibility to fix. By refusing to give up my apartment, I wasn't just protecting a property, I was breaking a dysfunctional pattern. Professionally, I've thrived in the space created by setting these boundaries. Without the constant drain of family drama, I've had the energy to take on new projects at work, resulting in a promotion last quarter. I've also developed new friendships with people who respect boundaries and celebrate successes rather than try to claim them. Reflecting on this journey, I realized that what seemed like a crisis was actually an opportunity for growth. Had I given in, had I handed over the keys to avoid conflict, I would have reinforced a pattern that had been holding me back my entire life. Instead, I chose myself. I honored my decade of sacrifice and hard work. I established that my life is my own, not a resource for others to appropriate. And while that choice came with painful consequences, it also opened the door to a more authentic life. Today, I sit in my living room, the same room my sister once measured for her furniture, and feel nothing but gratitude. This space represents more than just a real estate investment. It's a testament to persistence, self-respect, and the courage to say no when necessary. The apartment is mine. The life I've built is mine. And for the first time, that feels exactly as it should be.